The end came not in a palace, but in a drainage pipe, a filthy, concrete tube beneath a highway outside the city of Sirte. This is where they found him, cornered, wounded, and terrified. The man who had called himself the King of Kings of Africa, the architect of a global terror network, the flamboyant dictator who had ruled a nation with an iron fist for 42 years, was dragged from the darkness into the harsh Libyan sun. The images, captured on a dozen cell phones and broadcast to a shocked world, were raw and brutal. There was no dignity in his demise. He was beaten, taunted, and killed by the very people he had once dismissed as rats. For the world, it was the chaotic end of a tyrant. But behind the mob justice and the grainy footage lies a different story. A hidden story of advanced technology, quiet professionals, and a calculated decision made thousands of miles away. Because while the hands that killed Muammar Gaddafi were Libyan, the eyes that found him, the weapon that stopped him, and the strategy that cornered him belonged in large part to the Central Intelligence Agency. This is the story of how the CIA, after decades of playing a deadly cat-and-mouse game, finally helped orchestrate the death of the man Ronald Reagan had famously dubbed the Mad Dog of the Middle East. To understand how it ended, you must first understand who he was. Muammar Gaddafi was not a typical dictator. He seized power in 1969 as a charismatic, 27-year-old army captain, overthrowing a pro-Western monarchy in a bloodless coup. He styled himself as the heir to Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, a revolutionary Arab nationalist. But he quickly mutated into something far stranger. He was a bizarre mix of political ideologue, desert mystic, and flamboyant narcissist. He authored the Green Book, his rambling and incoherent political philosophy that he declared would replace both capitalism and communism. He pitched his Bedouin tent in the gardens of lavish hotels during foreign visits and surrounded himself with a cadre of female bodyguards known as the Amazonian Guard. The world often laughed. They saw the eccentric outfits, the rambling speeches at the United Nations, the sheer theatrical absurdity of it all. This was a profound mistake. It allowed many to overlook the fact that behind the performance was a cold, ruthless killer. Gaddafi's regime was a police state built on fear, with a vast network of informants and brutal secret police who crushed any hint of dissent. His bizarre antics at home were matched by a campaign of terror abroad. For Gaddafi, international terrorism was not just a tool. It was a central pillar of his foreign policy. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Libya became the world's premier sponsor of terror. He provided money, weapons, and training camps for a who's who of violent extremist groups, from the IRA in Ireland to the Abu Nidal organization in the Middle East. He was an equal opportunity agent of chaos, sowing violence and instability wherever he could. For the CIA, Gaddafi went from a regional nuisance to a primary target. His intelligence services were directly implicated in the 1986 bombing of the La Belle nightclub in West Berlin, a disco popular with American soldiers. The attack killed 2 U.S. servicemen and a Turkish woman, and injured hundreds. President Reagan, enraged, retaliated with a massive series of airstrikes against Tripoli and Benghazi, codenamed Operation El Dorado Canyon. One of the bombs struck Gaddafi's Bab al-Azizia compound, reportedly killing his adopted infant daughter. Gaddafi himself survived. He was shaken but unbowed. The Mad Dog had been hit, but not put down. He would exact his revenge 2 years later, in an act of mass murder that would forever define his regime's evil. On December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103, en route from London to New York, exploded in the night sky over the small Scottish town of Lockerbie. All 259 people on board, including 190 Americans, were killed, along with 11 people on the ground. It was the deadliest terror attack on American civilians until 9/11. The investigation, a painstaking effort by Scottish police and the FBI, with crucial support from the CIA, eventually traced the bomb back to 2 Libyan intelligence operatives. The evidence was undeniable. Gaddafi had orchestrated an act of war against the United States, cloaked as an act of terror. The world was outraged. The United Nations imposed crippling sanctions. Libya became a pariah state, and Gaddafi became one of the most wanted men on the planet. But he was a survivor. He retreated into his fortress, weathered the sanctions, and ruled over his isolated kingdom. For the CIA and for successive American presidents, he was the problem that would not go away, a living symbol of terror who had American blood on his hands and had gotten away with it. The hunt was on, but it would take another 13 years, and a world changed by fire, for the final chapter to begin. The attacks of September 11, 2001, changed everything. In the smoking ruins of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the world was irrevocably split into two camps. Those who were with the United States in the war on terror, and those who were against it. Gaddafi, the master survivor, understood this new reality instantly. He knew that in this new black and white world, being a state sponsor of terror was a death sentence. Almost overnight, he began a remarkable campaign to rehabilitate himself. He was one of the first Arab leaders to condemn the 9/11 attacks and Al-Qaeda. He began sharing his regime's vast intelligence files on Islamic extremists with the CIA and Britain's MI6. He saw that the very jihadists he had once flirted with were now his enemies, too, as they viewed his secular regime as apostasy. This led to one of the strangest and most cynical alliances of the war on terror. The CIA, the very agency that had tried to overthrow and kill him, began a program of quiet cooperation with Gaddafi's intelligence services. It was a deal with the devil. In exchange for intelligence, the CIA participated in the dark art of rendition, delivering Libyan dissidents captured abroad back into the hands of Gaddafi's torturers. It was a morally compromising but, in the cold calculus of counterterrorism, useful relationship. The peak of his rehabilitation came in 2003. As American and British forces invaded Iraq to depose Saddam Hussein under the pretext of his possessing weapons of mass destruction, Gaddafi took note. He saw Saddam, another dictator who had defied the West, dragged from a hole and put on trial. Terrified he was next, Gaddafi made his final, dramatic gesture of surrender. He publicly announced that Libya would voluntarily abandon its own secret nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons programs and allow international inspectors full access. It was a stunning victory for Western diplomacy and intelligence. The mad dog had seemingly been tamed. He was welcomed back into the international community. The sanctions were lifted. Oil money flowed back into Libya. Western leaders, from Tony Blair to Condoleezza Rice, flew to Tripoli to shake his hand in his Bedouin tent. Gaddafi had completed his masterpiece. He had used the war on terror to guarantee his own survival, transforming himself from pariah to partner. For the next 8 years, he reveled in his newfound legitimacy, all while his secret police continued to brutalize his own people. The CIA's mission had shifted from hunting him to working with him. But beneath the surface, the embers of revolution were glowing. In early 2011, the firestorm of the Arab Spring, which had already toppled dictators in neighboring Tunisia and Egypt, finally reached Libya. Protests erupted in the eastern city of Benghazi. Gaddafi's response was swift and merciless. He denounced the protesters as drug-addled foreign agents and rats, and dispatched his military, including elite brigades commanded by his sons, to crush them with overwhelming force. "We will come, inch by inch, house by house, alley by alley," he vowed in a televised speech, his voice filled with venom. It was a clear threat of a wholesale massacre. The world was faced with a choice. Would it stand by and watch another Srebrenica or Rwanda unfold on the shores of the Mediterranean? This time, the answer was no. The United Nations, with the backing of the Arab League, passed Resolution 1973, authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya and the use of all necessary measures to protect civilians. A NATO-led coalition, with the United States providing the critical intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, began a campaign of airstrikes. The CIA's mission changed once again. The brief, ugly partnership was over. The hunt was back on. But this was a new kind of hunt. The CIA was not going to put boots on the ground in a major way. The Obama administration was determined to avoid another Iraq-style quagmire. Instead, the agency's role was to be the unseen hand guiding the conflict. Small teams of CIA officers and special operations forces were quietly inserted into Libya. Their job was not to fight, but to find, advise, and liaise with the nascent rebel factions. They were the link between the ragtag militias on the ground and the advanced air power of NATO in the sky. It was a shadow war. While NATO jets and Predator drones, often flown by CIA operators from bases hundreds of miles away, systematically destroyed Gaddafi's tanks, artillery, and command centers, the agency's operatives on the ground were gathering human intelligence. They were mapping the complex web of rebel groups, identifying the trustworthy commanders, and feeding a constant stream of targeting information back to their headquarters in Langley and to NATO planners in Brussels. They were, in effect, the eyes of the rebellion, giving a disorganized insurgency the lethal precision of a modern military. Gaddafi, cut off from his army and his people, was forced to go on the run. The hunter had become the hunted. For weeks, Gaddafi vanished. The most watched man in the world had become a ghost, moving between safe houses in his final loyalist stronghold, the coastal city of Sirte. Finding him became the single most important objective for the CIA and its partners. This is where the full, terrifying power of modern American intelligence was focused on one man. The hunt was a technological masterpiece. The National Security Agency, or NSA, deployed its vast global listening apparatus, a digital dragnet designed to hoover up any electronic whisper. They monitored satellite phone signals, text messages, and internet traffic, searching for any trace of Gaddafi or his inner circle. In the skies above Sirte, a fleet of America's most advanced reconnaissance assets maintained a constant, unblinking vigil. Manned spy planes like the U-2 flying at the edge of space and a swarm of unmanned drones, Predators, Reapers, and the stealthy Global Hawk used high-resolution cameras, infrared sensors, and signals intelligence gear to watch the city day and night. The CIA cross-referenced this technological data with intelligence from human sources on the ground, agents they had cultivated within the local population and rebel groups. It was a painstaking process of elimination, of watching and waiting, of slowly tightening the net. The breakthrough came on the morning of October 20th, 2011. Signals intelligence picked up a crucial piece of the puzzle, a frantic call made on a satellite phone by one of Gaddafi's aides. The call was brief, but it was enough. Using direction-finding technology, the NSA triangulated the signal's origin to a specific district in Sirte. At the same time, drone feeds and CIA sources on the ground reported a large convoy of vehicles attempting to break out of the besieged city. It was him. He was making a run for it. The information was flashed from the NSA's headquarters at Fort Meade, Maryland, to CIA Langley, and then relayed to NATO command. Within minutes, the kill chain was activated. A U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagle and an unmanned CIA Predator drone were vectored to the coordinates. The Predator's camera zoomed in, its laser designator painting the lead vehicle of the fleeing convoy. A single Hellfire missile, a weapon whose name means fire from the sky, was launched. It struck with perfect precision, turning the vehicle into a fireball and bringing the convoy to a screeching, chaotic halt. Gaddafi himself was not killed in the initial strike. Wounded and disoriented, he and his remaining bodyguards scrambled from their vehicles and sought refuge in a nearby drainage culvert. But the strike had done its job. It had pinned him down and, crucially, alerted nearby rebel fighters to his exact location. The drones circling overhead watched it all unfold, their feeds providing a godlike view of the final moments. They watched as the rebels swarmed the drainage pipe, their excited shouts audible even on the audio feeds. They watched as the former dictator was pulled, bleeding and begging, into the daylight. The CIA and NATO had found him, fixed him, and delivered him to his fate. They did not pull the trigger, but they had aimed the gun and loaded the bullet. In the end, the mad dog of the Middle East, a man who had haunted the CIA for more than a generation, met his end not in a surgical strike, but at the hands of an angry mob, his final moments captured for the world to see. It was a brutal, ugly end to a brutal, ugly life. A stark and fitting final act in one of the agency's longest and most personal coward wars.